Sabrina 90s comic, issue 13. We start out seeing Hilda and Zelda plan on leaving the house to go to a safari. I love how they trust Sabrina to be alone. Although with her recklessness with magic, maybe they shouldn't and should take her with them like real parents. But she always manages to solve her magic problems in the end. Salem hopes he won't shoot any animals. That only makes sense to me because he's a cat, so it taught him empathy for animals. Zelda makes a pun taking a picture of him and says, "Of course, starting with you." Someone arrives through the transportation closet. Well, I'd seen silhouette at first. Hilda recognizes him. He picks up Salem, saying happily, "Salem, you old hairball, how are you?" And then he says that Sabrina must be the new witch in the family, who he hasn't seen since she was knee-high to a duck. He says that she still could be if it was a really big duck. It was funny seeing him zap up a duck so casually and the head of it broke through the ceiling. But it would have been funnier if he turned himself into a duck, like I thought at first. Instead of being her father, he's her cousin Ambrose. Well, I like him right away, although he shouldn't be kissing the hand of his cousin. Ambrose reveals that Hilda and Zelda had mentored him in magic too. Yeah, why did the show force Sabrina to have a mentor in magic later when her aunts already existed then? That always felt arbitrary and annoying in the sitcom. Hilda says with an amusing smirk, "We were hoping we'd get it right this time." Ambrose says he's not a total failure and he's here to announce something. Salem says amusingly, "You're finally getting a job?" He says no. He's definitely different from the 70s comic Cousin Ambrose. Instead, it turns out he's engaged to Enchantra. This story seems familiar. He already knows that Enchantra had turned Salem into a cat, and he doesn't mind the age difference of a couple hundred years because they're in love. He says that while she can get a little hot-headed, with him she's sweet. To be fair, there are plenty of people with horrible taste in relationships in real life too, so this isn't forced. He's just naive. Ambrose says that he'll bring Enchantra over Sunday for a family dinner. Hilda reluctantly agrees because she doesn't have a choice. Hilda complains that Ambrose is lazy, and out of nowhere she says that he sees Enchantra as a meal ticket. And after Salem hopes Enchantra will be happy enough to change him back, and Sabrina's annoyed by her aunts worrying that Enchantra will be mad at various things wrong, Sabrina wants them to treat her like any other guest. And then some loud trumpets magically appear playing Enchantra's fanfare and she teleports here. Oh god, what happened to her hair? She looks awful. She looked awesome in the Sonic crossover. I guess she either didn't look in the mirror, or she's out of touch with fashion, or she thinks her hair always looks good. I refuse to believe that hairstyle is fashionable anywhere. It's a minor nitpick, it's just that this is really early installment weirdness compared to the Sonic crossover design. She calls Hilda and Zelda by the wrong names, Helga and Zippy, and Ambrose is brave enough to correct her. She doesn't snap at him for that, so that's good. Instead she asks Sabrina, "Is your curtsy broken?" She relatably says that she doesn't know how, so I guess she wasn't looking at Hilda and Zelda when they did it, or she's just making an excuse not to do it. And Enchantra magically forces her to curtsy properly. She says that she forgot Salem lived here, and lampshades, "It's a little odd having an ex-fiancé at the same party with a current fiancé." I love her dialogue. Salem says that if she turns him human, he'll be out of here right away. She laughs and says that it takes a few more than 100 years for her to get over a grudge. But it was an arranged marriage! She shouldn't have expected him to love her in the first place. Of course he had a prior girlfriend. She wouldn't have even gotten the chance to get attached to him. I guess she really had her hopes up for him, despite not meeting him yet. Sabrina stands up to her, "You can't talk like that to Salem." She definitely puts emotions before logic. I mean, Enchantra could have been a lot worse to Salem than that. Salem tells her to be careful or she'll be turned into a cat too, and he mentions the worst part of being one. She's smart enough to learn her lesson and offer her food. And fortunately, Enchantra is nice enough to not turn into a cat after that, so she's not as bad as she could be. She immediately cheers up. This is probably how he's seeing her. She's honest, brutally so. But honesty is better than lying sometimes because it means you're more trustworthy. She says that her dinner stinks because she hates common food. Sabrina's an idiot again by yelling at her, saying that she zapped and re-zapped all afternoon to get a meal to suit her. And if Enchantra was really smart, she'd have told him exactly what she wanted to eat. If they were really smart, they would have asked her what she wanted to eat. She says that she's squawking like a bird and threatens to turn her into one. Fortunately, she changes her mind about that. But then she says that Sabrina's strawberry shortcake sucks too. She can't handle anything. Sabrina snaps at her again, when I would have stayed silent and fuming the whole time. She threatens to turn Sabrina into a flea. Salem says stupidly, "Cool, then she can hang out with me." She almost does, but Sabrina's still her, because Della, her personal assistant, filled in for Enchantra for a dry run to test her reaction to her personality. She tells Sabrina to work on her self-control because she can't be going off at the wedding. Maybe she did this behind Enchantra's back, but I didn't expect her to be that brave. It certainly explains why she was surprisingly merciful as Enchantra. I mean, you'd think Enchantra could have just used magic to make the cake that she didn't like the taste of taste good. She says that if Enchantra gets miffed, she could turn the whole place into a barnyard. Isn't there any way for witches to get rid of anger from their brain? Isn't there a spell for that anywhere? You'd think she'd do that to herself to feel better. But I guess she just likes getting angry at everything. Sabrina's polite enough to thank her, and Della's nice enough to compliment her shortcake after all. Then Enchantra yells because she's looking for them in the other realm. Surprisingly, the story ends there, to continue on to an unrelated one. In the next story, Sabrina wants Harvey to see a movie with her, but Harvey wants to get home and try out his new game. She says that she did make some of his favorite cookies, and he says it'll take a few to go. And he fortunately explains that he's been waiting 6 months for this game. She just tells him to have fun, probably thinking that watching him play would be way too boring. She should explain that though. Hilda says happily that in her days it was the Crusades, not video games, that kept boys busy. Why the hell are they happy? And it wasn't every boy that was doing that. Zelda says that there are some things girls just can't compete with, talking as if no girl ever plays video games. It's obvious the writer's never met a female gamer in his life. And then Sabrina says that if she competes in a video game, Harvey will have to notice her. Probably notice her suck at it, but then she zaps herself into the cartridge. That might be less humiliating? Harvey says that it seems like Super Sab is the only character he can pick. And Sabrina finds out that she has to fight a big sumo wrestler girl. I like that the writer's being creative with the video game. Sabrina better hope she's not anything like Mortal Kombat. It turns out that Sabrina's magic doesn't work here, out of nowhere. And out of nowhere even more, the character in the video game says to her that she has to win the match first. Why would she be able to talk instead of just being programmed to speak in what the video game's coding lets her say? This isn't Wreck-It Ralph. Sabrina says that she just assumed this would be a Sonic game. Why does she think Sonic is cute? Classic Sonic was kinda cute because he was chubby, and that was the whole problem. Harvey says that his character isn't responding. The same logic for why she can't use magic, that she's in the confines of the game, should apply to this. If she used magic to make herself part of the video game temporarily, and she's a playable character, it would be obvious that she has to let Harvey control her like one, or else he gets suspicious. He's already saying that his character isn't responding. Fortunately, she's finally smart enough to tickle Sumo Sue into giving up. This is the first time I think I've ever seen a female sumo wrestler. You can barely tell, but at least that was some variety to make it worth seeing. I'll probably never see another one. I giggled when Eddie complained, "I can't believe it! Your character just tickled Sumo Sue into submission." Harvey says, "I didn't even know there was a control for that." Why doesn't he just assume it was one of her special moves, like her fatality? He calls the game stupid after that, instead of appreciating the variety and seeing tickling in a fighting game for the first time. He calls Sabrina at the end, and says that one of the characters logically reminded him of her. And she says, "As long as it wasn't Sumo Sue, I'll take that as a compliment." Now she'll have to lie that she's heard of the game enough to know about Sumo Sue. I guess the story was making up for the escapist fantasy every gamer would have of going into a game, by having Sabrina realistically struggle in it severely. Which helps prevent you from being really jealous of her, as logically, video game characters have it really rough. I know I'd be exhausted if I was a character in a Harvest Moon game. In the next story, Sabrina asks Salem how he's feeling as a telling title is above her. Salem's smart enough to get suspicious because it's early on a Saturday morning and she's already dressed, and he's being asked how he feels. So he immediately realizes it's time for the vet and wants to hide. I don't know why a person turned into a cat would feel this way though. It's like being scared of the doctor. He's not a cat, so he should know that the vet is just there to help him. Sabrina should logically just teleport Salem directly to her. Instead, Hilda tries a convoluted solution for her and makes the furniture levitate. So Salem complains, "It's just not fair living with witches." Are you serious? Dr. Katz? I hope it's explained that he legally changed his name. That's just too on the nose for a vet. Sabrina's flirted with by a guy right away, and she says he's not half bad instead of saying she already has a boyfriend, because she's fine with ditching him if she thinks there's someone better. At least that's refreshing compared to the show where Harvey was the one true guy for her that she obsessed over and took forever to get over after the breakup. She asks what his dog's name is, and he says Brutus. Like Commander Brutus. Salem thinks that this is his chance to get Sabrina, even though it's not her fault he has to go to the vet every so often because they care about his well-being. Actually, why is a teenager taking Salem to the vet instead of one of her aunts? They sure trust their reckless teenager a lot. Out of nowhere, Salem burps really loudly. I guess he was looking away from her when he blamed Sabrina for the human burp, because they should have seen whose mouth was open. Wouldn't he have looked at him immediately? I guess not if she thought she had to tell him it was him. Instead, the guy makes me hate him. Although, to be fair, if the burp was obviously human, he doesn't have any other choice but to assume that it was her. Then she gets called in, and we cut to Salem being on top of some cabinets waiting for the doctor. Sabrina uses magic to get up to him instead of get him to her for some reason. So she's left on top of the cabinets, which is more dangerous obviously. So what was she thinking? So she gets humiliated again. That was just mean-spirited. She may annoy me with her stupidity, but I still can't help but feel sorry for her. The vet says that Salem has to get some shots. And he shouts, "Shots?" And he somehow assumes that the girl said that. Why doesn't he ask Sabrina why she put her hand over Salem's mouth? Logically, he'd know Salem said it, and Sabrina would simply erase his memory and they'd move on, instead of Sabrina being humiliated again. I would find it cathartic if she was punished by her aunts for something she really deserved punishment for. Somehow Salem is surprised that he's getting shots. I guess it doesn't happen every checkup. Salem threatens to scream, so Sabrina puts a big gumball in his mouth and muffles him. Salem screams in pain when he gets injected, and Sabrina has to lie that it was her and she just can't stand the sight of needles. Even though, again, Salem would obviously have a male voice. She just erases memory of it. He says that he should be healthy, and reality ensues for once as he asks about the gum in his mouth that apparently didn't keep him from screaming in pain. He says angrily that she should at least make sure it's sugarless gum, instead of telling her to never give a cat gum, period. Which I assume would be more responsible. It's a good thing that doesn't get the cat taken away. He says that he needs to check Salem's ears. Salem calls him a quack, just to relieve stress having to go to the vet, I guess, since there's no proof of that. And again, the writing frustrates me because the doctor assumes Sabrina said that when she's a woman, not a guy. So she has to lie awkwardly. This is not fun. So the story ends with him telling Sabrina to see a therapist. Even I would have written this story better. He would have just kept discovering that Salem can talk and Sabrina would have to erase his memory over and over again. I guess it's impossible to make him unable to talk temporarily because that would involve modifying the enchantress spell on him in some way. That just made me angry. I mean, she turned him into a cat who can talk, not a cat. Bill Gallagher wrote the first story, which was about Sabrina's lazy but entertaining cousin announcing his marriage to Enchantra. And it turns out her assistant disguised herself as her to see how Sabrina would react to her personality at dinner, being almost as obnoxious as possible about it. Well, I'm glad she complimented the strawberry shortcake and only pretended to hate it. It would have been nice if she gave her the strawberry shortcake. And there was somewhat of an excuse for the premise because Ambrose likes how Enchantra's nice to him, and he wants her as a free meal ticket. The second story, presumably by the same writer, is about Sabrina going into Harvey's fighting game, just to be forced to tickle the sumo wrestler so she'd win, as she inexplicably risked Harvey getting suspicious of her because he couldn't in fact control her. So what was she thinking there? But it was fascinating to see her as a video game character. It was relatable to see her use her powers for that, and it was realistic that she struggled because of it. But why couldn't she use magic in the game? The third story was way too aggravating. Sabrina just got humiliated over and over again as people somehow kept assuming she was the one talking when Salem would have a male deep voice. Logically, they just keep finding out Salem could talk at the vets and she'd have to keep erasing his memory of it. Sabrina being made to suffer can work if it's as an intentional punishment that she did something severe enough to deserve. Like taking her aunt's magic away for a week. The story seemed like an obvious one, showing what a talking cat like him would be like at the vet. But I'm just wondering why they didn't cast a spell to silence him, and why her aunt had Sabrina take him to the vet.